So I've just been at Rishi Sunak's final Scottish press conference for the general election. How would I assess it? A total and utter car crash. He looked like a man who is going through the motions and who knows it's over. Joining me today to talk about the worst political campaign I've ever covered are Chris McCall and Andrew Quinn. This is Planet Holyrood.
It's important we look at the facts.
Politics has to be about service.
A modern form of national service.
The outcome, that's for the voters to decide.
So I'm just back from Rishi Sunak's final Scottish press event for the general election. It was at the Apex Hotel in the Grassmarket. It was called to coincide with the Scottish Tory Manifesto launch, which was chaired by Douglas Ross. Got to be honest with you, it wasn't a hugely impressive event. I think what we're dealing with here is two guys who are vying for the crown of the most incompetent Tory campaigner in the history of politics. I'm not sure who's going to win. I'm not sure who's going to get the gold medal at the end of the campaign, but they're both doing their best to try and beat each other. Chris, I mean, we've been to so many of these things. It's always the same thing. You have the initial speech from Douglas Ross, and then you're hurried into a back room for a huddle with the Prime Minister. You get one question. I asked him why he's so unpopular. He was whisked away at the end of it, and that's it. I mean, it's just not happening for them, is it? It's gone from bad to worse. And the story on July 5th is going to be, how far are they going to fall?
Absolutely. Come July 5th, after polling day, Rishi Sunak, if he doesn't announce immediately that he's stepping down, it's going to be pretty soon afterwards. And we already know, of course, that Douglas Ross does not plan to hang around as Scottish Conservatives leader because he took the unprecedented step of announcing that he would be quitting regardless of the result in the middle of the general election campaign. If I was a Conservative candidate, and of course I'm pleased to say that I am not, I would have looked at today's event with a mixture of horror and, borderline revulsion that the leaders of the party, who the people that are meant to be inspiring their vote to turn out, are doing the absolute opposite. There are, a hefty chunk of Conservative-leaning voters in Scotland, but many of them will not be voting Tory. Many of them will be voting Labour. Many of them recognise that the party that they've probably placed faith in for decades, in some cases, is just ceased to function effectively, and they recognise that there is a need to boot them out of power because they have been so hapless and inept over 14 years in Downing Street and various different leaders and prime ministers. It's just been one disaster after another. And it has an effect on everybody, regardless of your political persuasion. If the economy goes south, if mortgage rates goes up, if the price of food doubles, everyone is affected. And you have to be pretty committed to a political party, not to say, you know what, I'll vote for them regardless, come what may. And yeah, the scale of the defeat that's coming to the Conservatives, I think a few of them are waking up to just how bad it could be. But I mean, all bets are off. No pun intended for the Tories betting scandal. I know that they like to far on these things, but it really could be unprecedented, the scale of defeat they face.
There was about 15 journalists at the huddle in the back room, and I was sat directly across from the Prime Minister, and I was looking at him, and he cut a sad, forlorn figure. I contrast it with Starmer last week in Whitburn, who went to a Windows firm, and he arrived with a bit of swagger. And when I interviewed him, got a one-to-one, he just seemed to be in quite an ebullient, confident mode. And then I contrast that with Sunak, and he reeked of a guy who knows that the campaign is already done and dusted. He knows that it's over. He knows he's going to be going down in history as the guy who led the Tories to a landslide defeat, probably this generation's John Major. He was just going through the motions. And, it's fascinating to see a Prime Minister like that. I've lost count of the number of hopeless Labour leaders over the years who just look well beat before polling day. But this is a Tory Prime Minister. The Conservatives pride themselves on being the natural party of government, and here they are staring down the barrel of a gun, perhaps even winning as few as like 80, 90 seats, Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, it could really be terrible for them. I mean, you were saying it could be like John Major, but John Major won the 1992 election, so he's at least got that, and he kind of stole that from Labour. I mean, yeah, Sunak it's looking absolutely terrible. I mean, I was today in East Renfrewshire, and Rachel Reeves was there, and you could tell she was just in good form because she just knows things are going really, really badly for the Tories. I mean, this betting scandal really isn't helping them, and there'll be more to come with that as well. Like, it looks like there could be some government ministers involved. We don't quite know yet, but the Tories aren't being clear about it. They've just said a small number of people are involved. But so we've got 10 days till the election. If we find out more names, even more damage could be done. So, I mean, yeah, Labour are laughing. They're going to absolutely gub them here. And there's very little Sunak can do about it. I think he's particularly disappointed because he went up against Liz Truss. He tried to present himself as a sensible candidate, which I guess compared to her, he really did seem much more sensible. His career's gone pretty smoothly so far. He's obviously from quite a wealthy background and married into a very wealthy family. So his whole life seems to have gone pretty swimmingly. He was head boy at his school as well, his posh private school. So he obviously thought he could do really well as PM, turn things around, but he's not. It's been really disastrous. I mean, the campaign's been awful. And yeah, now he just looks really tired. He almost looks like he can't wait to get back in California and working over there. Someone did point out that the American school term starts back in August, so maybe his Waynes will be at school over there.
Yeah, just looking at the actual event itself, which was for the Scottish Tory Manifesto, that was surreal as well, because the Scottish Tory leader, Douglas Ross, in the middle of the general election campaign, said that he's going to stand down as Tory leader after July the 4th. And yet he produced this manifesto, which has got a raft of devolved policy commitments like cutting income tax, improving schools, improving hospitals, yet he's off ski in 11 days. So, I mean, that manifesto is shredded on the day of the election. He's not going to be implementing any of that because he's not going to be in government. I mean, the Tory policies on these issues, they'll be a matter for whoever succeeds him. They've got nothing to do with him. I think just the brass neck of Douglas Ross to kind of commit the Conservatives to these things when he knows that they become irrelevant in less than 2 weeks is pretty cynical and breathtaking, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, let's just remind ourselves, for people that have had the good sense to not read the Scottish Conservatives Manifesto, which we published today, it's talking about 5 key areas. These include, quote, repairing the roads, ending long NHS waits, restoring our schools, making Scotland safer, and lastly, cutting your tax. Now, tax with the exception, because most of the taxation does rest with Westminster, but all those other subjects, repairing the roads, ending long NHS waits, etc., these are all things that fall either under the Scottish Government or with local councils here in Scotland. MPs elected to Westminster on July 4th will not have the power over those issues. Now, obviously, spending decisions made in Westminster can have a big knock-on effect up here, but ultimately it's not going to be the likely next Labour government that will be focusing on ending long NHS waits. It will be the Scottish Government here in Scotland, where SNP ministers are already under significant pressure on this issue. So to give voters the idea that, you know, this is what this election is about, it's just rubbish, really. And I mean, I don't want to blame the hard pressed Scottish Conservative staffers who are toiling away in the background to produce this document. The senior people in charge really should be asking themselves, is this it? Is this all we're really offering? I mean, to me, it just smacks of being a lazy will this do document. You know, the party knows it's about to get a hiding on both sides of the border. They know that most voters are not going to engage in the manifesto. So it's just, let's put in any old rubbish just to fill the pages. That's what this document says to me. It's not the work of a party that feels it's going to be taking the hard decisions on the issues that matter in the coming weeks.
I mean, the only way they could cut tax is if they get into government. And, I think there's more chance of Scotland miraculously getting into the next round of the Euros than there is the Scottish Tories entering government in 2026. It's just not going to happen. So to put that in black and white, it's intellectually bereft, political cynicism at its worst. And even covering it felt insulting, to be honest with you. I totally understand that at a UK reserve level, the Conservatives have to have policies and they have to be taken seriously and they have to be scrutinised over it. But for a guy who's halfway out the door to be producing a detailed devolved manifesto just struck me as the height of cheek, Andrew.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, isn't it? Because before Douglas Ross announced he was standing down and the whole David Duckett scandal, the Scottish Tories looked like they might hold on to their seats. Like, it looked like a real possibility. It looked like they might buck the UK Tory trend and not really do too badly. But now, I mean, that decision was wild of Douglas Ross to stand in David Duckett's place. It looks like he's stabbed his pal in the back, his hospitalised pal in the back. So, I mean, it was kind of there for them to do all right because the SNP are obviously not going to do as well as they did before, and that's where the 6 Tory seats which we won last time, they're competing against the SNP. But now they've kind of offered the SNP a little bit of a get out of jail free card. Like they're going to give the SNP a chance to maybe dampen some of the losses that they're going to receive. So yeah, I don't really know what Douglas Ross is all about, and I mean it's a real time of reckoning, I guess, for the Scottish Conservatives because they need to pick a new leader. They need to decide what their direction's going to be. Are they going to want to just cut away from the UK party? Are they going to have someone else who's a bit less of a normal Tory? Like, are they going to have Russell Finlay, who might appeal to more folk in the Central Belt? Or are they going to have Murdo Fraser, who's a bit more of a traditional Conservative? Or could it be someone else? Like, it's so hard to tell. No one's really saying too much about it from them, I don't think. They're all just waiting until the election happens. But yeah, their future looks pretty bleak. Going from what has been a very strong period for them, really, like they're the opposition in Scotland, and you look at the next Scottish election, and that looks completely impossible now, even though they're 10 seats ahead of Labour. So yeah, it's been a disaster, and I mean it's pretty much all on Douglas Ross's poor political judgment.
Yeah, and just listening to Sunak and to Douglas Ross, I mean most of the messaging was anti-SNP. They did occasionally mention Labour, but only as an afterthought. And to be honest with you, I think that Ross and Sunak probably mentioned reform more than they did Labour. And you do get the impression that their entire general election campaign in Scotland is geared towards helping Douglas Ross get re-elected. In the same way that there's suggestions that the SNP election campaign was about helping Stephen Flynn. The same can be said about Douglas Ross. Now, I kind of feel like he's probably still the favourite to win that seat. I feel like the SNP are falling at a faster rate in Scotland than the Tories. But you'd have to say, Chris, it could still be a tight race in that Douglas Ross seat. If the SNP voters if they're out in force and they are committed, then they could well topple him.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I don't think there's any guarantee that Douglas Ross can win that seat. Just on the point that you made about the manifesto mentioning the SNP more than anyone, apparently the SNP have counted, and the Tory manifesto mentioned the SNP a total of 88 times in 76 pages, which I think tells you everything about the people the Tories are trying to target. They really want to replay the 2014 independence referendum campaign and then the subsequent election campaigns led by Ruth Davidson when the Tories were on the up in Scotland, positioning themselves as the party of the union, the party most opposed to independence. But times have moved on. We're 10 years down the line from the referendum. The prospect of an Indy Ref 2 has receded into the distance. On the wider issue of independence, the SNP now looks to be struggling for a coherent strategy in the long to medium term. So I just don't think that issue is the rallying call that the Conservatives would like it to be anymore. You can criticise the Scottish Government on their domestic record, and a lot of voters do. But are they necessarily going to trust the Conservatives to fix that? Well, you look at the Conservatives' record of the UK government, and no, I think the answer is no, they will not trust them. So, what does Douglas Ross sell to the voters of Aberdeenshire North? He says, I'm Douglas Ross, I'm standing on my track record. My track record of becoming the first leader of a major party in the UK in the modern era to quit during an election campaign. It's quite extraordinary, really, but the thing is, he might still win it. The voting patterns in the northeast of Scotland, Labour in recent memory have not been strong there. It probably will come down to a Tory versus SNP scrap and how tactically voters choose to be when they go to the polling booth on July 4th. But Douglas Ross will have a real fear that his grand plan to leave Holyrood, leave the stresses of the Scottish Conservative leadership, and stroll to Westminster and hopefully pick up a shadow cabinet job. The whole thing could backfire spectacularly, because if he loses out on July 4th, if he fails to win that seat, his political career may simply not recover.
I started the podcast episode by talking about how far Labour were ahead and how it looks to be over for the Conservatives. I'm just wondering, is there anything that could happen in the next 10, 11 days that could sink Labour's campaign or give the Tories momentum? And the only thing I can think of is this BBC debate, the head-to-head between Sunak and Starmer Wednesday evening. Maybe Sunak would just go out and out negative on Starmer and his character and his record as the chief prosecutor. What do you think, Andrew? Is that his final chance, or is it all over before that debate even begins?
Yeah, I guess he does have a chance to perhaps make a dent. The Tories have pretty much accepted that they've lost. They're going on this stop Labour from getting a supermajority line. That's a kind of main thing at the moment. So they've pretty much conceded the election, although Sunak himself isn't saying it. Obviously, his pals are. But him really desperately trying to land blows on Starmer, desperate in these debates. It did in the other debates, although he's been more aggressive, and you could perhaps say in ways he's won the debates against Starmer. He doesn't look prime ministerial. He looks like a guy who's got no chance of winning when he's hitting out with these things. He's hit out with that £2,000 tax line, which civil servants have come out and said it wasn't done by them. They were just given the numbers. It was also over 4 years, the £2,000 tax line as well. So he just looks, desperate. He doesn't look like a prime minister. Whereas all Starmer really has to do is stay calm, not say too much, and stick to the lines that he's already got. Because
a draw would be fine for Starmer, wouldn't it, on Wednesday?
Even a loss would be fine. He needs to get beat 20-0 pretty much to have any sort of chance of getting beaten. I don't think he's going to do that. Starmer's got a very decorated career. He's been obviously we said his job's a lawyer. He's been under pressure before. I don't expect him to crumble in that case. Maybe he'll stumble over a few lines, but it's too far for the Tories now. Obviously we hope it's too far at the record, but there's no way Sunak can do anything. It's been an awful campaign, and as I said earlier, this betting stuff's still really hanging over them. So I don't think anything's going to go well for them at all.
Chris, I was talking to a relative of mine who's no fan of Labour, probably more of a Tory, and even this relative described Starmer as a solid citizen. You know, I think to kind of go after his character, to try and portray him as some like friend of terrorists or, you know, friend of criminals, it just doesn't really pass the credibility test, does it?
No, I mean, I think it's fair to say that when Starmer became Labour leader, he was, even by politician standards in the UK, very much an unknown quantity. Voters didn't know who he was or where he'd come from. But Sir Keir Starmer, in the intervening years, has patiently and repeatedly told the voters of his background. You know, the guy is ultimately a self-made man. You know, he was the first in his family to go to university. He went on to have, you know, an extremely distinguished legal career. And even though for people who, you know, maybe be a bit suspicious of the legal system in general, I think they can recognise the guy as a success. You know, he did it all in legal terms. You know, he was the director of public prosecutions. He had a stellar record on human rights cases, and he came to politics relatively late in life. You know, he became an MP in his 50s. It's quite unusual in this day and age. But I think the public kind of like that, because it is often said that too many politicians these days, they all have the same backgrounds. You know, they went to a handful of the same universities. They then become researchers for their chosen political party. They join the office of an MP or an MSP, and they, you know, gradually begin to climb the greasy pole. But Starmer, you know, went out and achieved in one career and then set himself out, you know, at a time when he could easily have retired and, you know, went and hung out at a, you know, a very, you know, agreeable beach house in some lovely climate, and, you know, put his feet up. He's decided to really go for it in terms of public service. And I do think most voters kind of respect that, even if they won't vote for him. You know, even if they have reservations about Labour in general, maybe they didn't like the Jeremy Corbyn era, maybe they're just, you know, they can't bring themselves to vote Labour if they've been Tory voters for too long. I think even with all that said, that, you know, the public kind of likes Starmer for, you know, he is a good public servant. You know, he's not in it for himself. And, you know, he came from, by elite politics standards these days, a fairly modest background. So, you know, there is a bit of, you know, sneering on social media, jokes about, oh, Keir Starmer says again that his dad's a toolmaker. But I feel he's got every right to say that. He has mentioned himself that because he was given a knighthood, he is, of course, Sir Keir Starmer. Many people kind of presume that that's actually a sign of him coming from a bit of an aristocratic background. They don't get that that was a reward for his achievements in his previous career. You know, he didn't inherit that title. His dad wasn't a lord. He got given that for the hard work that he'd given to, you know, the public. And then, you know, it just so happens he's gone to a different path with politics. So I feel, you know, the Tories can, you know, they've got 10 days to repeat the kind of attacks that they've been dabbling with in recent times on social media, but whether they'll have any cut through, I don't think they are. I think most people now know who they're going to vote for. I think most people who are engaged with this election now know who Keir Starmer is. I think the majority of the electorate are ultimately going to back him.
All right, thanks, chaps. Let's wrap that one up. Thank you again to Andrew and to Chris for joining me today. Planet Holyrood is available every weekday during the general election campaign. You can listen to this episode and previous episodes on Spotify or watch it on the Daily Records YouTube channel.
It's important we look at the facts. Politics has to be about service.
A modern form of national service.
The outcome, that's for the voters to decide.